Hi, I'm DudeTheNinja. In this video, I try to make a robot girl themed around the classic from TF2. You could say that I am putting the DudeTheNinja gimmick of the century and the DudeTheNinja gimmick of the past couple years together. Once again, this is spurred by the annual TF2 Maps community's 72-hour jam, which this year was raising money for Doctors Without Borders. When the jam was announced, it was rather quietly so, being only posted on the TF2 blog, and not on any of TF2 Maps' social medias, and also less than a month before it actually began. As a result, I didn't have much time to think about what I wanted to actually make for it. I did my typical shower thinking, ruminating on either making some era-appropriate British trains, or another weapon moemorphism robot girl. I ended up settling on the latter, and also settled on making her the classic. Like with Sabrina, designing her was pretty simple in terms of not needing any iteration. In fact, I settled on a name before I even began preliminary idea sketching, that being Cassie. To set her apart from my own designs and other existing TF2 robot girls, I decided to lean further into the weapons design itself, rather than sticking some sniper details onto a robot with an arm-mounted gun and calling it a day. I knew, even without sketching, that I wanted the scope, which I considered the main standout detail of the classic, to be represented through her hair. I wasn't sure on having normal eyes covered and having the scope be an actual single eye, or using it like a third eye, but I settled on the latter, giving her solid colour eyes, a bit like the vanilla TF2 robots, because I wanted to make her a little more visually different to my existing works, specifically the mini Maidbot. I ended up making her body slightly more militaristic looking, because her basis, the classic, is a modern military weapon compared to the more time and character appropriate stock sniper rifle. If I was doing a robot girl based on the stock rifle, I'd definitely lean into more of a sniper-esque design in terms of the clothing. Anyway, not long after that preliminary sketch, it was jam time, and as a result, modelling time. At first, I forgot to record, because of course I did. This will happen again. It took me about 2 hours to get the head looking nice. The face was just temporary. I intended to replace it with a flat painted sprite texture with different sprites for different expressions, a bit like my non-TF2 character models, but I kept it in the end. I spent a good chunk of that time making the main bulk of the helmet-like hair part of the head. Whilst the shape of Cassie's hair isn't classic-like, being a lot squarer, I made sure to keep the fill the same, with the extra detail on the upper indent, the octagon spam for the additional detail, and wait a second, I can make the head more classic scope shaped. I kid you not, I realised this while writing this bit of the script. So I did. Following some preparation for optimization later down the line, I then took a short break to stretch, share these two images for feedback on the head shape on Twitter, and then think about how I'm going to go about the body. The consensus of the people that saw the image within that short break was keep the slope, so keep it I shall. I also agree it looked better in hindsight. After that, it was body time. The body's pretty similar to other characters I've modelled, but I decided to make the body segments be individually modelled partway through, a bit like in the concept art. It'll increase the poly count a bit, but I'm not too worried about that, as most of my characters end up in the 2000 to 4000 face count anyway. I spend a lot of time in this time-lapse segment, both now and later, just fiddling around with making the body look how I envisioned it, particularly in the hips. The arms were slightly different to how I do them normally, as the two forearms differ massively. I modelled the upper arm symmetrically with a mirror modifier, grabbed Sabrina's hands to use for the left hand, and modelled the right hand, keeping the details of the classic while retaining a lowish poly count. One thing I gave her classic arm that the regular classic lacks is an actual reciprocating bolt. The sniper cycles the bolt of the classic by supposedly moving a rotating bolt, because it's using the same animation as every other sniper rifle, but this just isn't feasible, because there's no space to actually rotate the bolt. It should have a charging handle that is racked backwards, but there's not any modelled by the ejection port, nor is there a charging handle where it exists on the G36. The legs weren't too hard, especially because I went with stubby legs that lack feet, a la Aegis from Persona, or the replicas from Signalis. Just two leg-shaped cylinders, with the upper one also split into two separate pieces, to allow for the armor plate greebly thing I gave the thigh. I was busy for most of Saturday with some real life business, so I didn't really get started until the evening. Again. I spent hours slaving away at the rigging, UV maps and texture blockout. I don't know why it took me so long for this model in particular. I think it was probably due to already being tired, the monotony, and then lack of any decent background noise, be it friends talking or videos to watch. So I didn't record. I was low energy, and I'd be tabbing in and out, and there'd be a lot of dead air, and also, UV unwrapping is just boring to watch. But I got it all done, and I also got the textures blocked out, ready to be painted in the morning. Forget I said morning. I didn't start until like 3 PM, but that's okay, as I got all the textures done in the day. I started with the head, as the head is the bit that's most important. Then the arm gun, as that's more detailed, but also it's not team coloured. Finally, the body. Remember where I said forgetting to record would happen again? It happened again. I thought I was recording my time-lapse for the body, but the entire time I had actually pressed Start Virtual Camera on my recording software. It's the digital equivalent of leaving the lens cap on when doing something that can only be done once. Time lapses consist of primarily me just painting detail in places I didn't model it, as well as applying eye candy in the form of visible brushstrokes and edgeware. Additionally, I did something that usually isn't done for TF2 model textures, in the form of hand painting shadow. Typically, models in TF2, as well as Valve games in general, have ambient shadow generated by the modeler's program of choice, which is called baking, and then placed over the colour texture to darken areas that don't receive as much ambient light. However, due to how I unwrapped the UVs for Cassie being similar to how I unwrapped my more original styled models that have their textures laid out more like retro video game character textures, I couldn't bake ambient occlusion lest I deal with conflicting UV islands leading to weird baking. Fortunately, like my more recent original styled models, I could instead just paint the shadows in and have not only more control over how they look, but have a more visually appealing and stylized result. After all, I wasn't making this specifically to be in the TF2 visual style, but more so a mishmash of my own style and TF2's. A bit like a refined version of my Sabrina model, utilising techniques in the other models I made this year, including a more OC-ified Sabrina. Hey, maybe I should make a video on that. Comment if you would like that, or just comment anyway to boost this video's engagement. Another thing I did here that I learnt from doing the original Sabrina model was to make sure I did all the team colour texturing on its own layer. That way, I don't have to go back and select areas that were specifically the team colour to hue shift and then correct manually, which could result in a messy result. But instead I could just hue shift the entire team colour layer without damaging other bits of the textures in the process. Yippee! After doing all this, I whipped up a couple poses in Blender without any proper control rig, just Blender's built-in auto IK system, rendered a turntable showcase animation, and exported to source for people to play it around in SFM if they felt like it. If you're someone that would be interested in playing around with the model, a link to the TF2 Maps jam entry is in the description below. At the moment, Cassie is only a model that can be used for posing and animating, as I ran out of time to do more ambitious things considering my batteries were pretty worn out. I definitely want to turn her into a player model mod eventually, with custom first person animations to make her properly use her arm gun instead of just making her struggle with firing a rifle without a hand to hold the grip, let alone any fingers to pull the trigger. This is a long-term goal, however. Before that, I want to go back to Sabrina and give her support for cosmetics. I've had a mod pop up on my radar by a username Cypher that replaced the Scout with a rabbit that has support for a bunch of cosmetics, and I think Sabrina deserves that kind of love too. I will probably start with just refitting hats and accessory items like badges, as that's quite easy to do, and then work from there. I suffered an SSD death right after Christmas, which led to me losing the source files for Sabrina, particularly the source engine work files. I still have everything that's more important regarding the mod, but losing some of the data was a little demoralising, so you might need to give me some time to pick myself up off my feet and get a steady workflow going again in terms of making cosmetic support. Anyways, thank you very much for sticking around to the end of the video. I haven't made a video in a while again, because I just haven't had anything video worthy to show off. Most of my recent work is art that I forget to time-lapse, and I don't really have anything special to talk about in the moment regarding them. Post them on my socials if you're interested. I have a couple of mod adjacent things I could show off in short voiceless videos, I guess, so maybe look out for that. I've kept people up to date on my community tab occasionally, with my most recent community post being right around New Year's, so you might want to look at that for more information so I don't end up repeating myself. Okay, that's it for now. Like and sub. Bye.